Bertram and Gladys Aaron, endowed professor, the celebrated Dr. Richard Freund. Richard.
So should I speak up there?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so let's make sure that everybody can hear me properly. Yes, yes. Give me the hands up. Yes. Okay. So I'm going to give you the backstory to the backstory. You know, a lot of people like to hear the backstory of how things come to be. I'm going to give you the backstory. So you're also going to see what's going to be, I think, the biggest part of this contribution that we've been making. In a year from now, there'll be a new television documentary made about resistance. They fought back, which really is a part of the whole story. So I'll start with my backstory. You know, I came here 2 years ago. I am Richard Freund, the Bertram and Gladys Aaron Professor of Jewish Studies. And I bring greetings from Bert and Gladys, who would love to be there, but can't be here today. So, we started with Dead Sea Scrolls. And people said, oh, this person worked in Dead Sea Scrolls, this is a great thing for the university. I have to tell you that in my 40 years of teaching in Jewish studies, came to this university, I had no idea about the collaboration at a place like this. I've been on the West Coast at UCSD. I've been in the middle of the country at the University of Nebraska. I've been in the University of Hartford, the East Coast. I have absolutely never seen the collaboration that I see at this university. There's something in the water. I'm convinced there's something in the water, but the reason why I say that is because I've just never seen this kind of cooperation between town and gown, to the community and the university, and this really is how this all started. Because Mark, if you had not come up with this idea of doing something, and having the right partners, Reef Center, having lots of other partners on campus, really none of this would be possible. If you go outside, you look at that poster, and you see that departments all around the university participated in reflections on the Holocaust. What was it about this? So I'm going to tell you my own backstory for this whole. I've been teaching the Holocaust as part of my regular sequence. A regular sequence of university classes. And I was always troubled by students who came up to me in the beginning. You ask people why you're taking this course. And students would say, why didn't the Jews resist the Nazis? Why did they go like lambs to the slaughter? Now, I knew that wasn't true. And so throughout the whole semester, you sit there with students, you try to show them how that was. But what happened during the 2 years was that Mark came up with this idea of doing something like a Wunderbar for the Virginia Children's Wars. And I said, this Wunderbar has one very, very important aspect to it. It's a type of resistance that the So, as part of the resistance idea, I started examining all these different sites that we had been working on in Eastern Europe, in Warsaw, in Poland, in Lithuania, and Latvia. And one of the things that we started to look at was, instead of just looking at the sites, we wanted to know, what did the Jews do at that site to resist the Nazis? There were 40,000 areas, concentration ghettos. In most of those places, there was resistance going on. So, I wrote projects. Most of the projects that I worked on were in Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland. And one of the backstories of this whole thing was, we planned for 2 years to figure out how to get to these places and see what's left of the remains of the resistance. So Mark is there working on the Wunderbar. I'm working on this big project to see what is left of the actual resistance sites. Then we had a pandemic. Did you know that? We had a big pandemic. And part of the pandemic was it gave me an insight into something which I'm going to hopefully be able to integrate. When we came up with the idea, I think it was Dr. Reef's idea, I'm going to give you credit, that Elie Wiesel had written this very, very difficult play, The Trial of God. Now, I'll tell you, in 2019, Trial of God was difficult. In 2020, the Trial of God was symbolic. The Trial of God now symbolized what everybody was now feeling, the sense that where is God? Where is God in these kinds of events? So, as part of this combination, Mark, again, you get credit, that to be able to create something new on a play that is very, very problematic. I'll just tell you, you'll hear more from my colleague, Galit. What is so problematic about this? It's not the words, it's not the idea. Elie Wiesel, who had been in Auschwitz, was troubled by the fact that there was a trial of God. There was a trial of God in Auschwitz. But he felt it was so traumatic, he could not allow it to be overshadow the ideas that he wanted to get to. So what did he do? He transferred the entire story of the Auschwitz trial of God from 1944 to 1648. I don't see any of my students here, but I'll say this. We just got up to this section in my class. In 1648, 1649, one of the worst violence years for the history of Judaism took place. It was a long-standing problem between Ukrainians and Poles and the Jews. And the Jews basically got in the center of this and ended up with huge losses. The losses were as large, comparatively, to traditional weapons. 100,000, 150,000 Jews were killed. It was very traumatic for the Jews. So, when Elie Wiesel was hunting for where to place the trial of God, he didn't go to 1348 for the plague. He didn't go to the destruction of the temple. He didn't go to 1944. He went to 1648 because he felt like he could then give it a sense of tremendous trauma without hope. Holocaust. So, as a backstory of this, as Mark and you found a great librettist, you found a great orchestrator, when you start to look at the development of the trial of God, it really is just amazing. You're able to take this historical event and make it into something that really does not only hold water, but allow people to understand this traumatic event without the whole rest of the problem. So I'm going to give you one of the great secrets of Judaism. Pay attention, this is one of the secrets of Judaism. Leo Strauss, a very famous philosopher at the University of Chicago, said the Jews became really, really famous for writing in a time of persecution. They figured out a way of writing about tremendously difficult things that had happened. And yet, to write about them in ways so that people could understand them, they could express what had happened without it becoming the thing. Everybody knows the famous Arthur Miller and The Crucible. When he wrote in the 50s, The Crucible, Arthur Miller was not talking about the Salem witch trials. I mean, he was talking about the Salem witch trials, but he was really talking about another witch trial that was going on in the United States. That is the art of writing in a time of persecution. So, I'll bring you up to date. In the past month, while you were preparing for this with the rehearsals, we were excavating in Warsaw. And I want to tell you about 3 people and what resistance really means. This is why Galit's work is so important. The first person is a man by the name of Emanuel Ringelblum. Emanuel Ringelblum, you probably heard of, in Warsaw. He and 60 historians sat down and figured out a way of collecting as many pieces of documentation to be able to save what was left of European Jewry. We were searching for the third part of his archives. Second person I'm going to mention is Avram Sutzkever, a Yiddish poet in Vilna who was brought in by the Nazis to identify all the great books of Judaism and then burn the rest. What he did was he created a paper brigade where he took all the best books. He hid them on his person with other people and then hid them in the Vilna ghetto. They were all saved. The third person I'm going to mention is Marcel Najari. Never heard of Marcel Najari. He and 8 other people in Auschwitz wrote down moving accounts of what it is that we have that happened at Auschwitz. not just the camp, not just the memories of survivors. They wrote down in real time what was going on. So I'm going to tell you what the story of resistance really is. There are actually 5 different types of Jewish resistance that went on during the Holocaust. One was fight, like the Warsaw Ghetto, Sobibor. One was flight, when people escaped either before, after, or during, through means like the Holocaust escape tunnel. Devotion. Devotion means that they committed themselves to finding a way to remember who they were as Jews. Music and literature and art, and then documentation. They actually left documentation and dissimulation. They actually hid. They hid these things so they're available. So one of the things that I want you to remember today, this is the backstory of the backstory, is that it really is amazing when something like Wunderbar, written in 1938, resonates in Southern Virginia with a Virginia children's chorus. I can't tell you how amazing that is. This is a posthumous victory over the Nazis. And this is really what it is that happens when you devote yourself to resistance, even in the worst of conditions during the Holocaust. That's my backstory of the backstory. There will be a film next year. Hopefully we'll do it in a much bigger venue, but I think it's going to be a big deal. Now I want to introduce my colleague for today, because part of this whole thing is, and I'll tell you, this is one of these serendipitous moments. I was flying back from flying back from Vilna in August. And what I do, I don't know about you when you fly, but I download all these different articles I'm never going to get to. And I sit there and read these articles during the long flight. So I got this very odd journal, Givani. And I'm reading through the article, and there's a scholar who's writing about Holocaust musical composers and what happened. Now I'll tell you something that's very interesting to me. Never read this journal before, but Mark had just contacted me, said, we need to get somebody who's really an ethnomusicologist to come and talk about this music, because this music is very unusual. And I said, I think I have the right person. I sent him the article just before I left Vilna. By the time I got it, he says, great article. Let's invite Galit. So Galit Gertsenzon is a unique product that's for you today. Why do I say that? A DMA, a doctorate in musical arts from the University of Cincinnati, the conservatory there. Bless you. She also has a BA and an MA from Tel Aviv University in music. And more importantly, she herself is a gifted artist. This happens very rarely. She, 20 years ago, became very interested in this whole topic. Her parents are from Moldova. I'm happy to say that she's become a colleague for me. And today, you're going to learn about the backstory of the music, because that is really what makes this so unique. So I want to thank everybody. I want to thank, all the people here at CNU that really have made this a unique event. Mark, I have to say, this is one of the great collaborations that I've had in 40 years. The Reef Center, for the Aaron Professorship This has been a tremendous, tremendous boost, and I'm happy I could introduce Galit today. Galit Gertsenzon. I asked Galit to do me one favor, and I'm not showing any slides. This is the trailer. This is the trailer for the new television documentary. You're seeing, if you haven't gone over to see the Auschwitz exhibit, you can see it longer and with other clips from it. But you'll see a 2-minute clip from the trailer of this new documentary. Thanks.
You have a contradiction between what people thought and what actually happened.
People have this myth stuck in their heads that the Jews went to their deaths like sheep to the slaughter. But this is where the real story begins.
You can't say that the Jews were silent. That's absolute nonsense. The Jews were armed. They were ready to resist.
It's hard to excavate, but we are sure there are weapons still in these places.
The prisoners were able to collect a number of knives and very primitive grenades.
Escaping is a form of resistance.
You're not going to break my humanity.
There's no way you can put a value on that kind of resistance. That stays forever.
So this is a story that gives you power to live.
Jews did not go as sheep to the slaughter. They fought back.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you all for having me here. It's a great pleasure. And I will shift now this conversation from what Richard had discussed to artistic resistance. This afternoon, as we remember and reflect upon the events of the Holocaust, we will together consider its human expressions through music and text. This variety of testimony stories told in words and sounds, it is asking us to feel the Holocaust as experienced by the generation who lived it. And then, somehow, miraculously, they created artful articulations through theater, opera, and literature. And in the wonderful work of contemporary artists, such as Andrew Scott Bell, who's here with us this afternoon, whose lively and thoughtful interpretations derive directly from the original testimony, we honor and commemorate the past through this youthful lens. The show this afternoon will begin with the children's opera Brundibar, this brief, entertaining and naive musical work that was composed in 1938 by Hans Krasa with a libretto by Adolf Hofmeister, a Czech poet and illustrator. It will be followed by Andrew's opera entitled The Trial of God with a libretto by Jason Carney, who is a professor of English here at CNU. The opera is based on Elie Wiesel's play of the same title. As many of us who have studied the historical events of the Holocaust know, the testimonies of its survivors are told in many ways. There are many ways to listen and many more ways to comprehend. And while the experience of the Holocaust cannot be understood through one story, one composition, one lesson, one movie, our engagement with different types of testimony as we experience it today brings us momentarily closer to the atrocities of the time when humanity revealed its worst. These are our living and breathing legacies. It's our inheritance. And it is my hope that their impact will remain with us long after we exit the theater. My goal for this short prelude this afternoon is to demonstrate how each of these compositions that you will hear provides a unique way to relate to the individual and collective suffering in varying forms. It is my firm belief, and as my colleague Richard had expressed it before, Brundibar is a creation of political resistance, of silent protest. It was an attempt to challenge and resist the Nazis. And while performed many times in Terezin, as I will describe later in detail, it provided solace to the imprisoned children and refuge from the harsh camp conditions they were meant to endure. Most importantly, perhaps, it honored and empowered these children performers and their spectators alike, children as well. So let us consider what is spiritual and artistic resistance. In the pictures that we see here, on the left is a picture of the children in the original Brundibar cast in Terezin. On the picture on the high right is a choir that was rehearsing Verdi's Requiem, led by Raphael Schechter. The picture in the bottom right is that of the ghetto swingers in Terezin. This was resistance. Many scholars, artists, musicians who were silenced during the Holocaust had limited ways of expressing protest, while academics searched for ways to document. Artists and musicians created music. They raised quiet, sometimes hidden ways to resist the cruel and discriminatory regime of the time. Expressions born of social, political, and humanitarian conflict. Those become forms of spiritual resistance. And these are plentiful and richly varied. One striking example that Richard had mentioned before was the underground archive Oneg Shabbat in the Warsaw Ghetto. In Hebrew, Oneg Shabbat translates as that special time when people in the Jewish community come together to enjoy the Shabbat. But in fact, this was a space that was transformed into a large research archive documenting the life of Jews in the ghetto. As Richard mentioned, established by Emanuel Ringelblum and a group of scholars, including rabbis, social workers, historians, and writers, all came together and collected information and important historical testimony of the events undertaking the Jews of Warsaw and the horrific things that happened there. Various artists and poets composed and performed in the camps. One of them, probably the most notable, was Mordechai Gebirtig, who before the 1938, before what we regard as the beginning of the Holocaust, witnessed the horrors of a massacre that took place in a small town named Pricik in Poland. He was so moved by those atrocities that he came up with that song that many are familiar with, as Brent, Our Town is Burning. So I will take a minute to share with you a recording by Benti Kahan of that song.
Reise binden mit viel Kosten, Reisen brechen und zerflossen, starker noch die wilde Flammen,
Now we'll continue with another example by a Polish composer named Szymon Laks. Szymon Laks did survive the Holocaust, but as a leader of the men's orchestra in Auschwitz, he was also responsible for transcribing music scores for the entire orchestra to play. As we all have heard, a lot of music was banned by the Nazis. That included Polish music, jazz music, music by Roma and Sinti, obviously Jewish music. And in his book, Music of Another World, Szymon Laks tells a story. He was walking in between the barracks one day and he found a piece of paper on the ground. He picked it up, and when he looked into this paper, he saw musical notes. He transcribed them into the 3 Warsaw Polonaises. And since this music was not allowed to be played, he and his friends to the orchestra made sure to play that when the Nazis were unaware. And he testified and he said, this for us was resistance. Being able to play the music that is banned by the Nazis was what we call resistance. And when he was liberated in 1947, he transcribed this orchestra music again for piano solo. And I will play perhaps another minute from the second Polonaise. So unfortunately, because we are short in time this afternoon, I will move on. Other examples of resistance by children. Helga Weiss, that was deported into Terezin as a child. She had the gift of painting and drawing, and while at Terezin, Helga wrote a diary that included images of her life in the camp. One thing she recalled was what her father told her in 1941. He said, draw what you see, and this is exactly what she did. She drew the everyday life of the camp. Here, she testified the arrival to Terezin in 1942. And as you can see, each of the people arrived with a bag. Each person deported into the camp was allowed only one bag weighing 50 kilos. Another drawing of a Polish children transport in August 29, 1943. Here, Helga Weiss recalls, and that's a quote, "These children arrived in deplorable conditions and were quarantined the whole time in Terezin. They were supposed to be sent to Switzerland, but ended up in Auschwitz." In the context of spiritual and artistic resistance, Terezin is like no other camp. Less than an hour away north of Prague, the Terezin camp was built by Joseph II in the 18th century. It was built and named after his mother Teresa. And that's where the name comes, Theresienstadt, Terezin. It was, so what we can see on the right is the town. It's a garrison town. And Across from the river, there is also another garrison prison. So the pictures that we see on the left are actually, it's not the town but the prison. And it's quite a large scale prison. So in 1941, Jews were deported into this ghetto. It was very well marketed by the Nazis, trying to convince the most prominent Jews to come, promising them that this will be a high-scale retirement settlement. And so very prominent, educated elite of intellectuals from across Europe arrived during the first year. Unlike other camps, which were more transient, Terezin inmates were held for longer periods before they were ultimately sent to other sites, such as Auschwitz. And because of this, and for other reasons, the camp was able to establish its own community with its own administrative practices and committees to help create and encourage a rich cultural life there. This life included concert performances, lectures, education programs, opera productions for children and for adults. Music education in Terezin was sparse. Not everyone was able to receive the education. And as we learned, 1.5 million children were killed in the Holocaust. And yet, genocide occurred in other ways and forms as well. One of the most dreadful attacks against children was the interruption and deprivation of their education. And yet, while the Germans used everything in their power to eradicate proper education, some gaps emerged through their policies. And one of these gaps happened in orphanages. So those Jewish orphanages provided for children communal living, some degree of school instruction, but also choral groups, poetry and drama clubs. While children in Terezin were involved in various activities incorporating song and other arts, Hans Krasse's Bundibar played a very important role, both in the orphanage in Prague, as I will describe soon, and also in Terezin. And indeed, Bundibar is a different story and has no similar compositional work that I recall. It has a distinct testimony, a distinct orientation. At the heart of the work is the fact that children that were most innocent and vulnerable were the victims. It is a musical expression made for children and performed by children, as we will see in one of the videos that I will share. And as I said, there are many ways to tell a story, and many more ways in which we experienced it, and Bundibar is an excellent example of this. Hans Krasse was a composer. He was an established, award-winning Czech composer whose prominence reached even the United States the first half of the 20th century, while he was still alive. His music was performed by the Boston Symphony in a concert. And in 1938, he collaborated with Adolf Hofmeister, who was a social activist, poet, and illustrator, and together they created this protest opera. The first premiere was in Nazi-occupied Prague, so this was before those kids were in Terezin. And the second performance of that same opera, again, was in Prague in 1942. But at the time, mass transportations were taking place into Terezin, and unfortunately, Krasse was already there. So Krasse did not get to hear the performances in Prague. He was already in Terezin, and a score of the opera was smuggled into Terezin. At that point, Krasse, who was able to evaluate what kind of musical instruments he had in Terezin, reorchestrated the opera and made it available for production in Terezin itself. And the picture that we see is that of the Magdeburg barracks where the opera was performed. It was so popular that it was an excellent example, an excellent expression that could be incorporated into the Terezin propaganda movie established by the Nazis and directed by the Jewish director Galit Gertsenzon. And this picture is just a small part, it's from the movie itself. The movie was titled "The Führer Gives a City to the Jews." Wunderbar was performed 55 times in 1 year, and it was also performed during an inspection of the camp by the International Red Cross in September of that year. A few weeks after that inspection, in October 1944, a mass deportation of Terezin prisoners to Auschwitz took place, and it marked the ending of Wunderbar production and the death of many of its performers and musicians involved. Wunderbar's story is a tale of a poor family and a testament to the power of teamwork and communal support. Annika and Pepicek are siblings whose mother is sick. The children go on a journey to the town's marketplace to look for milk, as prescribed by the doctor, and that they're hoping would save their mother. Unfortunately, they lack the money that needed, but then they noticed Wunderbar, the old organ grinder who plays on the street corner and receives coins. They too wish to sing in order to raise the necessary funds to purchase the milk, but they are unsuccessful. Nobody listens to them, and Wunderbar chases them away, until 3 animals come to the rescue: a sparrow, a cat, and a dog. The animals help them recruit other children to join in the choir, and the next morning all the children and the animals begin in vibrant communal singing. Their beautiful songs endear the support of townsfolk, and Annika and Pepicek raise the money for milk. But then, as you're going to see this afternoon, Wunderbar sneaks in and tries to steal the money. All the children chase him to get back the money, and the story concludes in a victory song about conquering the wicked Wunderbar. So what do we see in this image? We see children during the performance. They are sad, they are tired, they are dirty. And in this other picture, we see, I think you will agree with me, we see the complete opposite. Children outside, also in Terezin, around the same time. They're well dressed, they're smiling, and they're excited. This picture was directed for this movie by Galit Gertsenzon. This was not the reality of Terezin. This was a sham. It was directed in order to show the world how well the Jews were treated by the Nazis. And I would like to show a few, perhaps a few minutes or a few seconds from the film. What I have is about 20 minutes long. Unfortunately, we do not have that time. So what I will show you is, first of all, this is a soccer match, again, directed very well by Galit Gertsenzon. Taking place in Terezin.
Auch dieses Fußballspiel wurde lediglich für die Filmaufnahmen in Szene gesetzt. In einem Schreiben des Regisseurs an die Arbeitszentrale im Ghetto heißt es: So, es sei.
And a musical performance.
Und so kam es zu dieser merkwürdigen Premiere einer Fantasieführstreicher, die Paul Haas komponiert hatte. Wieder waren die
The
Inhaftierten
performance
angewiesen
featured
worden, ihre
a
besten Sachen
piece by
anzuziehen.
composer Pavel Haas, who was also
gekleidete Menschen
incarcerated
wurden
in
nicht
Terezin
zugelassen.
at the time.
Kriegsversehrte und Invaliden nur, wenn sie zur Prominenz gehörten.
And just to give us some perspective to the performance that we will see tonight, this again is the original cast of Wunderbar in Terezin. And I will stop here just to draw your attention to the children in the audience. Some of them are not wearing clothes. Somehow the director may have missed that, because this excerpt is a part of the propaganda movie. What child would be undressed in a performance, right? So I invite you to watch it this afternoon and see how amazingly it is done by the Virginia Children's Choir. I will now take quite a shift to the trial of God. So, as you will witness this afternoon, the trial of God is a testimony of a man who nearly lost his entire family, his entire community, and the life that he had before the war. We will witness a great shift from the innocent, hopeful children's work into the dark, pessimistic view of a survivor whose entire life had been destroyed. As we watch it, we may ask some existential questions or ponder, how far can a man go in challenging long-cherished religious and cultural heritage? And this is exactly what we will see. Elie Wiesel was either 15 or 16 when he was in Auschwitz, and he witnessed those 3 Jewish rabbis put God on trial. The verdict found God guilty of crimes against creation and humankind. However, after announcing the decision, there was silence, and as the evening approached, all members went off to pray the Jewish evening prayer Ma'ariv in the evening service. It is in that way that Wiesel takes his audience through all of his experiences as a child during the invasion and as an incarcerated youth in Auschwitz, into the broken hearts of those deserted in the shattered Jewish towns across Europe, and into the hollowed spirit of vanished places where townspeople were murdered in the ghastly pogroms. Sham Gorod, the village at the heart of Wiesel's play, could easily be any other town that had been destroyed through the course of world history. Wiesel has some central questions that he's presenting through this play, through the opera. Why did God allow entire communities to be destroyed? Why did children die? Why were women raped, and why were whole towns and villages slaughtered? Why did victims go through suffering that lingered on and on? Why did God abandon his chosen people? It is my view, and I suppose some of you will agree with me, that the play does not provide us answers to those questions. Rather, Wiesel gives voice to the inner thoughts and questions through the skillful crafting of his characters. To some of us, questioning God, putting God on trial, may seem out of place, even offensive. And yet, let's look at it as one more testimony, one more reflection expressed by a person whose life transformed into a living hell. The setting is the ruined town of Shamgorod. Its name derived from 2 languages. Sham means there. If we change a little bit the pronunciation and say Shem, then in Hebrew means name. And Gorod in Russian means town. In my opinion, it is meant to represent any town. Yours, mine, ours. He takes us back to 1649 after a pogrom. A pogrom is a massacre. And in that massacre, death triumphed. The village is destroyed, buried in dust and darkness, and only a few people survive. And they are alone in an inn where many atrocities took place. The plot centers around the holiday of Purim, the happiest holiday in the Jewish calendar, when people allow themselves to indulge in silliness and light-hearted fun. It is the holiday commemorating the great miracle the Jews in Persia received when evil Haman attempted to kill them all. It was the wise and the courageous Queen Esther and her uncle Mordechai who were able to turn Haman's rule upside down and save all the Jews. And on that happy holiday, on that occasion, Wiesel transforms old perceptions and shares a controversial testimony. He transforms the rabbis that he met in the camp into three fictional minstrels in the play: Mendel, Avremel, and Yankel. They all seem unaware and disconnected, both physically and viscerally, of all the atrocities that took place in the town. Other characters include Berish, the innkeeper, who was sorrowful and angry. He lost his entire family and community except for his daughter Hannah, who was victimized and raped for hours by the angry mob. Berish was forced to watch her being tortured. Hannah appears weak, disconnected, and fragile. She may be mad or perhaps absent-minded. Maria, another character in the play, a servant at the inn, also a humiliated soul as well. The priest is a Russian Orthodox. He is kind but weak. In the opera this afternoon, you will witness how the priest attempts to save Berish and his daughter by directing them to the cross. He tries to save them from another massacre. And then the minstrels come to the inn, hoping to exchange some laughter and play for food. But as soon as they realize that there are no Jews left in the town and witness the angry and mournful Berish, they decide to put God on trial. Finally, Sam, the diabolic satanic character who does not reveal his identity, but has been previously seen by all the characters who are unable to determine exactly as to where did they see him before. He seems to have appeared prior to other massacres that took place in other towns. Sam comes in, cynically defending God in what seems like another diabolical act. His appearance is corrupt and destructive, as you will all witness. Throughout the play, Wiesel persistently questions what many hold as unquestionable. He's testing sacred understandings and cultural discourse in ways that may seem, as I mentioned, offensive. Through the character of Berish, it is my opinion that Wiesel brings to the fore provocative questions that challenge those Jewish traditions and years of faith and practice. And by doing so, what is he asking us to do? Is he asking us to reflect, to evaluate, and perhaps to consider faith in light of these events? So, again, we should consider this as one testimony, one story. Andrew Scott Bell and Jason Carney transformed the original play's thematic elements and bring the story into a fresh and clear relief, such that its essence occupies the stage in ways that help us picture Wiesel's testimony in our mind and through our senses. I would like to especially note that in their interpretation of the play, they provide the character of Hannah, who does not express herself much in the original play, a fresh voice, especially when she tells the story of her wedding night, a night that is destroyed by raging mobs who torture her and kill her family and neighbors. This afternoon, you will witness Hannah gaining a presence she did not have in the original play. And in this artful interpretation, Scott Bell and Carney give her space to sing as testimony to the horrors of her existence. Later, you will witness the minstrels joining the opera in the second song entitled We Drink. They enter the town wholly unaware of the massacre, intent on entertaining its inhabitants on the eve of Purim. In the fourth song, Berish, the mournful innkeeper, sings of unspeakable loss and accuses God. Berish later becomes even more blunt, and his anger rages as he spits out his persecution in the words,